Hey y'all, it's your favorite duck here, Derek the Duck. And today we're going to talk about the big British musical, which has largely been forgotten, known as Martin Guerre. Martin Guerre? Martin Guerre. Why? Because I feel like it's time to talk about it. The time is today. Yes, it is. It may seem a little odd, but yeah, I think today's the day to talk about it. You know, it was 30 years ago today when I first discovered this musical, which I don't know if you've seen some of my other videos. I go to Broadway a lot. I go to New York a lot. Um, I'm a huge fan of musical theater. Surprise, surprise. But of all of the musicals in the world and all time, my favorite one of all time is Martin Guerre. And I'll tell people that sometimes and they're like, what? In fact, I was even on a cruise recently and I was sort of challenging the pianist who was in playing in one of the atriums of the cruise ship. I said, why don't you play something from Martin Guerre? And he was like, oh, this is going to be tricky. And then when he introduced it, I wish I had kept the recording of it, but he said something like, well, this may be the worst musical of all time. So this is a divisive show. Um, I I think some people think it's one of the worst musicals of all time. I think it's the greatest musical of all time. However, there were times during the show's run, its illustrious run, when I both loved it and hated it, and it's complicated, and I think we need to get into it today because it's part of my life. It's a bigger part of my life than I thought it would be. This little show called Martin Guerre. So let's talk about it. We have to. We have to. Now, the first time I ever heard about it was 30 years ago today, which is completely shocking. I know the math doesn't quite work out since I am approximately 25 years old. But so, you know, I don't understand the physics of it. I must have been negative 5 years old when I saw this. It's the only thing I can think of. I went to see Phantom of the Opera. It was doing a touring show here in Texas. And here's the little brochure that it came with. They weren't all playbills. And I remember I was sitting around. I was waiting for the show to start or something like that. I was probably having a drink or two. Not really. Um, and I was thinking, and I noticed this part right here. It was about the producer, Cameron Mackintosh. Cameron Mackintosh is a great producer. He's best known for doing the big British musicals. Those were always my favorite. The ones from the 80s and 90s. We're talking Phantom, Les Mis, Miss Saigon, and and Martin Guerre of all shows. Now, I know nowadays the big British musicals have sort of fallen out of favor. Big Broadway shows, maybe minimalist shows like these Jamie Lloyd things that are coming out. I did see A Doll's House, that was pretty good. But, shows have kind of changed. Times have changed. And I do believe that the world wasn't, I'm not going to say the world wasn't ready for Martin Guerre, but maybe the world had moved on by the time Martin Guerre finally hit the stage. I think we had sort of already ended the run of these great big British musicals. But of all of those producers of the great big British musicals, Cameron Mackintosh was the man. He was the king. And I was reading his little biography here, and you can see it right here in this thing. And it's when it says it's Cameron Mackintosh, but then it continues writing right here. Look at that, what it says. What does it say? It says, next year he will produce the Bublil and Schoenberg musical, The Romance of Martin Guerre. Yes, The Romance of Martin Guerre. So 1995, 30 years ago today, I'm sitting there in the auditorium. I'm getting ready to watch Phantom for who knows what, the 12th time or something. And I'm seeing that there's going to be a new show from, amongst the greatest musical writers, in my opinion, Alain Boublil, Claude Michel Schoenberg, who of course did Les Mis and Miss Saigon. They were going to have a new show, and it was going to be called The Romance of Martin Guerre. I was completely hooked. That I was like, what's going to happen? What does this mean? This is, I needed to know everything about it. Just that one little sentence there, this sentence you just saw, this one sentence, I'm not going to lie, it changed my life forever. It really did. I know that sounds a little dramatic, but it's true. I needed to know everything about this show. But it was the year 1995, and that was an age before the internet. Again, hard to believe I existed during that time. So I was like, how am I gonna find out what that means? Where am I gonna find out this information? I could barely pay attention during, the Phantom singing Music of the Night or whatever. I was like, oh my gosh, there's going to be another one, from the writers of Les Mis, and it's going to be The Romance of Martin Guerre, and I had to know what that meant. It seemed so odd that that would be its title. Usually they do large ensemble kind of shows, like with Les Mis and even Miss Saigon. They're big casts, they're big epic stories in during war and all kinds of things like that. But The Romance of Martin Guerre almost sounded like it was just about one man, And I read a little more. I wouldn't know where I found some information, and it said it was a story about a man in the 1400s, medieval France. I was like, okay, how are they going to make a musical about that? So I was just so intrigued. It sounded very unusual, and the title itself just was a long title. Not just 2 words or anything. As you can see, obviously they changed it eventually, but at the time I loved the title, The Romance of Martin Guerre. And so I needed to know everything about it. And so in my research, I found out something about it, and there was apparently a book. And this book is called The Return of Martin Guerre. It almost sounds like it's a sequel to something, like some horror movie, but it's not. That's actually, there was no... The whole idea about this story, it's a medieval story. It's actually a true story, where it is based on a true story. There are court documents. There was a man in the 1400s in medieval France named Martin Guerre, or actually how it's pronounced is Martin de Guerre or something like that. But yeah, this is a true story, and this historian, Natalie Zeman Davis, wrote a really intriguing book about it. I read the whole thing. I had to know about it. I was absolutely entranced by the story. Look at these old court documents. Apparently it was a court case, and it's a pretty interesting one. And I saw the movie too, with Gerard Depardieu, or whatever his name is. I think he's been canceled these days, hasn't he? I'm not really sure. But yeah, so I saw that movie. Loved that movie. It's actually a really beautiful story, and when you watch the movie and read the book, you realize this was always meant to be a musical. In fact, it actually had been a musical. I think there was 2 others at least, one called maybe The Wife of Martin Guerre, I think, and then one called The House of Martin Guerre. So it had been workshopped before, and this would be The Romance of Martin Guerre, or simply Martin Guerre. And the story is actually like a timeless romance story, really. We're talking like Shakespearean in nature. So there was a man named Martin Guerre, a peasant, and he is about to be married to this beautiful woman named Bertrande, right? But he's really young and doesn't really want to get married to her. He he probably just doesn't like the idea of marriage. He's similar to the duck. He wants to see the world. He's a world traveler. He wants to go to Vegas or something. You know what I'm saying? So Martin is like not really interested. But the villagers, they're in a small village called Artegat in France. They all want this marriage to happen. And because back then, a lot of things had to do with land. I don't know if they had money or anything like that back then. So families wanted to combine each other and have wealth and resources, and they needed that by arranging marriages and stuff like that. Land was everything. Martin is, he's sort of forced into marriage, and he gets married, but he's not happy about it at all. So one day, he up and leaves. He leaves town. He doesn't say anything to anyone. He just leaves and goes away to war. I don't know, Catholics and Protestants and whatnot. So he runs off to war, and he's gone for 7 years, okay? Well, 7 years have passed so far, and no one's seen him. Many in the village think he's dead or something. And meanwhile, poor Bertrande, she's sitting around in the house, and she doesn't know what to do. Some people are saying she should get married again, but she kind of doesn't want to. She sort of likes her house, but at the same time, she just doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know if her husband will ever come back. And then one day, Martin comes back, completely shocks the village. However, it's not really Martin. Okay, now it's a man. His name is Arnaud. Okay, Arnaud Dutil. Now Arnaud is a friend of Martin. They met in the war, and there was like this big explosion or something, at least in some of the versions. And Arnaud thinks that Martin has died. So he travels all the way to Artegat to sort of let Bertrande and the villagers know that Martin has passed away. However, in doing so, as soon as he gets there, the villagers like shut him up. They don't want to hear it. They immediately just assume he is Martin. And he tries to protest, but they're like, no, you're Martin. They were waiting for him. They need him there, okay? They need him there to make sure that the land is in safe hands and that everything is right in the world. They don't really want to hear that it's not him. And then, of course, he sees the woman, the wife of Martin Guerre. And her story is almost as, sensational as Arnaud and Martin's story. In fact, that's why they would make a whole musical called The Wife of Martin Guerre. The question is, and different historians have different stories tell it differently. Does she know that that's really Martin? I mean, that's really an imposter, or is she so desperate to be happy and be married and not have other people in the village wanting, to marry her? Or does she want that stability so much that she just that she pretends that it's him? We don't really know. In history, that was part of the court case as well. But she sees this man, and it is not Martin, it is Arnaud. And of course, as any beautiful Shakespearean story or whatever, they do fall in love, at least in the musical. So whether it is Martin, the real one, or not, they fall in love, and it's passionate. But then, as the story continues, maybe the villagers aren't so keen on having him be Martin after all. And so the story progresses, and there's fire, and there's bloodshed, and there's all these things that make for an interesting story. And then, of course, there's this tragic ending. So that's just the basic premise of the story. And like I said, it's a fascinating story. In fact, it's inspired many, not just these musicals. If you've seen the movie Summersby with Richard Gere and Jodie Foster, it's the same retelling. Also, although Summersby is like the Martin Gere. It's a man who goes off, I think, in the Civil War or something like that, and he comes home. It's not really him, but Jodie Foster falls in love with him. So it's an interesting. It's just such a timeless story. It was made for the movies. It was made for the stage. So that was what I learned about the story, and I was excited about the musical, but there was very little to know about it. Then, we're talking 1995, AOL comes along. Okay. Everyone's favorite little dial-up ding, 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 ding. You had a little CD that you'd get at the grocery store, and it said you had like 10 free hours, and I was like, oh my gosh. So, like everyone on the internet, I used those 10 free hours to find out more about the musical Martin Gere. I'm pretty sure that's what everyone was doing with it at the time. But yes, so I would get online, I'd tell mom, hang up the phone, I'm getting on the internet, I'm doing the dial-up, I need to know about Martin Gere. So I was scouring the internet, and it took a while to find out more about this musical because they were still writing it. But then another internet program came along called Prodigy. I don't know if you know about Prodigy. Prodigy, they were thinking that would, completely change all the internet. Everyone would be on Prodigy one day or something like that. At the time, there were a lot of people on it. The best thing about Prodigy was its so-called message boards. Well, not so-called, it was just message boards. So I got on the Prodigy message boards, and I was completely addicted to it. Of course, I was in all of the musical theater groups, and there were murmurs, there were whispers. Everyone wanted to know, all the cool people, about this new musical Martin Gere. What was it going to be like? We've heard about it. Is it ready yet? And oh my gosh. Now, someone on the message boards posted that the show had been completely written and it was ready to go. And apparently in the UK, since this is a big British musical, it started on the West End like they all do, that there were some rehearsals, and the great theater critic Sheridan Morley, who I think wrote the biography of Noel Coward, a very famous biography, but he witnessed like some of the rehearsals, or knew some about. There was even a BBC mini recording that released a few snippets of songs. And from what I remember, and these are just, we're talking 30 years ago, but the best of my knowledge is that Sheridan Morley said that the music was soaring, and that it would catapult its two young stars, Ian Glenn, as are known, and Juliet Caton, or Caton, that it would propel those two individuals into international stardom. What? Who's Ian Glenn? Who's Juliet Caton? What's happening? I had to know more. I was, getting these little morsels was driving me insane. I needed to know. Now, at the time on these message boards, I was really big on bootleg trading for musical theater. I had no money. I was a kid. What are you going to do? So when I wanted to hear a musical, I couldn't just buy the CD or anything like that. What was that, $20 or something? So, or $40 for the big ones. I was like, so what I ended up doing was I got in these message boards, and I was in this one called audio tapes, okay, musical audio tapes. And I'm, this a long time ago on Prodigy. And what we would do is we would go into that, and everyone would post a list of all their bootlegs. By bootlegs, I mean we would go to the shows, the musicals, with a tape recorder and, stealthily record the audio of the musical. We put them on cassette tapes, and then like this, and then we would share it with our friends on the message boards. It was like all these musicals, all these tapes. I had so many. You should have seen. I had a closet full of them. They covered the floor. In order to start to become part of that community, you have to make one of your own. So I had gone to this one in San Antonio, Texas. It was Les Miserables. It was 1995 or something like that. Oh yes, yes, this little baby. Look at this one. Look at this, Les Miserables. Look at this tape. This is the actual master of it. Look at that. This is Les Miserables, San Antonio, Texas, tape 1 of 2 in the 90s. Obviously in the 90s. Look at this cassette tape. It had the best singer. I think her name was Karen Lynn Manuel, not Lynn Manuel Miranda's, but Karen Lynn Manuel. And she did the role of Eponine. She did an amazing job. Everyone wanted this tape. It was hard to find that part of the touring show with her singing Eponine. So I would post my little list, and I only had like 2 or 3 shows, and everyone was like, okay, I want to trade with you. I'll get you, Grease with Rosie O'Donnell. I don't know what it was. They were like, I'll get. I even had a copy of Carrie, the musical. That show only played like one night, okay? But I had a copy of it, of someone was there in the audience, recorded it. And, I was trading Sunset Boulevard. I got the one from Helen Schneider in Germany. I got the Les Mis from Germany. I always wanted the more unusual ones, the ones from different countries, that sort of thing. I had the Dutch version of Phantom. I had just this amazing collection. And every time I got one, I would post it on the list, and I would say, look, this is my list now. And my list got bigger and bigger, and people were, salivating over the Ducks list of musical bootlegs. And they would say, okay, well, I'll trade you, Miss Saigon. This is the last night on, the West End premiere. Some interesting, or the Australian cast. Really fascinating versions of it with and it was nothing better than that. So, I had all these all of these envelopes, these padded envelopes. I would send them out, and then in the mail they would all come to my house, and I couldn't wait for it. I would open them up. I would play with my Legos, and while I was putting together houses and Legos and stuff, I was listening to my tape player, and I would listen to these amazing bootlegs, and it was like being there. And that was the closest I could get for the most part. I could only see a couple of shows every now and then that were touring, that would come to Texas. I couldn't, go to England and watch a West End show or anything like that. That was how I got my musicals. And then one day, the day that would go in history, I was looking at the lists of everyone, and the Holy Grail showed up. One person in the entire community had a second night preview of Martin Guerre, the ultimate, in my opinion. I was like, what? I told the whole family, I want no one on dial-up. Everyone get off the phone. I'm going on Prodigy right now, and I'm going to get this Martin Guerre thing. So I immediately wrote to this lady, Sarah, sweetest lady. She was in London. She lived there, and she had seen the second preview night of Martin Guerre. And I offered her anything she wanted. She could have all of my musicals, anything for her to, she would have to take her tape player and duplicate it and send it to me, and I'd send her anything she wanted. And she's very sweet. She's like, sure. So I sent her 1 or 2 musicals that she wanted. She didn't even ask for that much. And she sent me Martin Guerre, and it came by air mail and all that stuff, and I waited. It was nothing like today, where a new musical comes out and then the next day, you can see Evita on the West End, and someone filmed part of it, and all of a sudden it's on YouTube. It wasn't like that. We had to work for it, okay? And It came in the mail. It came, and I still have it. I still have it. Here it is. This is my friend Sarah's writing from the UK. She wrote Martin Guerre and gave me this 2-tape set of the second preview night of this show. So, I closed the door to my room, got out the Legos or whatever I was going to do, and pressed play. I did. I pressed play. And then I listened to it. And I have to tell you, that music was, in my opinion, just excruciatingly beautiful. And to me, that is what makes a good musical, the music. I mean, everything else is good, the performers, the story, but it has to have good music in my, I don't really, everything else is secondary to me. And the music was phenomenal. I was in love with it. There were songs in there that I had to listen to like, a whole bunch of times just to really grasp how beautiful they were. From what Sheridan Morley had said, soaring to me was an understatement. This was music. The story, the way it was presented, from what I could hear, the so-called book of the musical, the way it was presented, it was just achingly romantic. I mean, I was in tears. It was like I was there, even though I wasn't. I thought that the singing was great. I loved Juliet Caton's voice. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. It was like an angel, in my opinion. And she did the music proud. Probably my favorite part of all of it was the orchestrations. They were by Jonathan Tunick. I think he did the orchestrations for that old movie Young Frankenstein. Very lush, very epic and orchestral, symphonic, and so that really elevated the music. I can't imagine it in anyone else's hands. I had heard that actually William David Brown was supposed to have done the orchestrations for it. He did the ones for Miss Saigon. Now, they're just such different shows. I couldn't imagine that he would do this. I heard that William David Brown had actually parted ways with Cameron Mackintosh, so we ended up getting Jonathan Tunick's sensational orchestrations. I mean, they were churning, they were beautiful. I always felt like William David Brown's orchestrations followed the melody too much, but weren't undercurrents to it. And the way Jonathan Tunick did it was just phenomenal. Just phenomenal. I was absolutely entranced. When I was finished listening and I finally pressed stop after hearing, the standing ovation at the end that just kept going until the tape ran out, I was just this starstruck shell, of a human being. I don't know. My world felt like it had just been ripped apart and replaced in a world where Martin Guerre now exists. I mean, it was such. I knew this would be just a phenomenal part of my world. Before it was just like Earth, Wind, and Fire, but now it was Earth, Wind, Fire, and Martin Guerre. I'm telling you, my whole world had been completely turned upside down and replaced, and I was in shock, wondering how am I supposed to live in this new world, where there is such, sorry, where there is, sorry, oh my gosh, okay, sorry, where there is such beauty, where there is such amazing music, and how can I go back? There was no turning back. There was no turning back for me. I was enthralled. This was the greatest thing I had ever heard. So I hope that gives you some appreciation for why I'm talking about this in the first place. So it starts quietly, when you listen to this, original tape. It's just like a very soft and it sort of rises into the music. It's not like Les Mis or Miss Saigon that both have these booming epic, beginnings or anything like that. It's very soft and it flows beautifully. The way they wrote the book of it really does flow. Now, this is a complete opera, like their other previous musicals. So it's not like a play with some music in it. It's completely sung through. And I love that, because I'm there for the music. Now, I'm gonna play a little of it for you. Now, what I did was I took those tapes. Of course, they're just tapes. They've been with me for all this time. They're gonna eventually melt, especially in this house. I have no air conditioning, but I did burn them into CDs back in the CD burning days, and I have no CD players in this house anymore. Now that everything's all streaming and, you know, most computers don't even have a CD drive or anything like that. So and I recently had a car, my little Toyota Corolla, and but I sold that, and it had a CD player, and I loved that car. My Mercedes is flashy and everything, but it won't play Martin Guerre bootlegs. Now I do have this very old iMac, from back in the day, which I usually just think is funny. But the reason I keep this, if you're wondering, is because it's the only thing that has a CD player in this house. So I'm actually going to play you a little bit of this music in a moment, so you can hear what I heard, because it needs to be heard, because otherwise you can search all you want on YouTube. You're not going to find some of what I'm going to show you. I'm also going to show you some drawings that I made. I was so desperate to see this musical, okay, that I had, my only way of venting was I actually drew what I imagined it looked like. Also on the on the message boards of the musical's message boards, I wrote the entire libretto, all of the lyrics that I could hear. I listened to the tapes and I transcribed them myself, because that's how the cool kids spent their evenings. So every line in the musical that I could hear, I wrote it out here. And I made this little document on a word processor, okay? And somehow I saved it as a little file and I put it out there on the message boards, and everyone loved this. A lot of people would fill in some of the blanks where there were words that I didn't hear, or they said, oh, you misspelled such and such in French or something like that, and I was so glad to hear what they had to say, and I would fill it in. But yeah, this was my my 1996 script, and I wrote it and sent it out to everyone. Now, I had seen, I took this off of something on some website, this very unusual logo for the show. I love it. I think it's very interesting. I didn't really understand it altogether. There's like this this picture. I don't know what this is. I don't, to this day. I think I read somewhere that it's both a face and a man upside down. So yeah, you can see it's kind of a man upside down. I don't know what that really has to do with Martin Guerre. Maybe there would be two men or something, but he's upside down in some other reality, I guess. Or it's like a face. So I don't know what kind of face that is. It's like some kind of insect alien with its tongue sticking out. I don't really know, but it was weird. I would draw it a lot, and I always drew that little tongue at the bottom. I was like, what's this? So it's kind of a bizarre logo, but I did put it on this. I had seen it somewhere, and I found it on Prodigy, and I started, sending it out to everyone. Now, so yeah, I was online a lot, and someone, I remember one of my friends, I was chatting with them in one of the chat rooms on AOL, because I spent my time between the AOL chat rooms and the Prodigy message boards. And they said, okay, well, I can't talk now. I'm going on the World Wide Web. And I go, the World Wide Web? I said, well, what's on the World Wide Web? Like, I couldn't imagine that there was anything else in the world that anyone would need. We had everything right there. We had chat rooms where we could talk about Martin Guerre, and we had message boards where we could talk about Martin Guerre. So what else was there? And I said, what's on the World Wide Web? And she goes, anything you can imagine. So I was like, oh man, I need to find out more about Martin Guerre. But in the meantime, while I was there, I was listening to this music over and over again. And I found some pictures. I drew some pictures in here, and I want to share them with you. Now, one of the first songs that you hear that I'll play in a minute, and I'm also going to show you my drawing to accompany what you're going to hear, is this song called When We Were Young. Now, if you do searches for When We Were Young, you're not going to find anything, okay? This song was like only in the previews, and then it was cut later. But it is an absolutely enchanting song. I don't know why they would cut it, but it was so beautiful. And what it basically is the couple, Martin and Bertrand. The whole village is there, and they've just gotten married, and they want to bless their bed, medieval days where the whole village would get together. And it was there's a sweetness to it. And at the time you could see that the community is actually tight-knit, and they are kind of sweet. There wasn't really that ominous undertone. I don't know if you've ever seen this movie called Dogville. I recommend it. It's an interesting movie it's from Lars von Trier, an eccentric director to say the least. But it's with Nicole Kidman. It's really interesting. She goes to a town, she's new, and everyone seems to be nice at first and want to help her. But by the end, their true colors come out, and the community like turns against her. And it's very similar to this Martin Guerre story. And I think that the song When We Were Young is very important to the narrative, because it shows that at one time, at least, there was some kind of harmony within the community. And the song is beautiful, very well orchestrated as well. So let's listen to it a little bit and kind of get an idea. This is like one of the very first songs you hear. Let's just listen, see what it sounds like. such a beautiful song, such a beautiful song, almost like a ballet, just very well orchestrated, very well crafted. And that sort of brings us to part of the story where Bertrand wants to be in the marriage, but Martin pulls away. Naturally, she goes into the song's "I Want" song. You know, like all Disney musicals, they'll right after the first couple of songs, you know, our heroine will sing some sort of "I Want" song. So that's the next. This one is called "Why Won't You Love Me." Now I love "Why Won't You Love Me." I thought it's not a very grand "I Want" song like say "I Dreamed a Dream" or "On My Own" sort of, but instead it's very simple and it's very sweet. And yeah, I imagined, you know, poor Bertrand standing there and singing it, forlorn, lost, and wishing that her husband loved her. Really, it's that simple. But it's a sweet song, and I love it. And I love Juliet Caton's voice in when she sings it. I think it's beautiful. After that song, again, like the story, it all flows very well. Like I said, Martin is ready to leave town. He doesn't want to be married. So he's not going to answer the question of why won't you love me. He's just gonna leave town. So he sings the big showstopper of the musical, Martin Guerre, the song itself. And it's just this rousing number. I absolutely love it. It sounds like something a pirate would sing of some sort, but it's rousing. It's got great orchestration, especially at the very end with the strings, and it just works. Just a great number. The first time I heard it on the bootleg, people were like whooping and everything at the end of it because they could tell this was really probably the biggest showstopper of the musical. I mean, it's the title song, the eponymous. But yeah, so we get that song, Martin Guerre. And then, once there's the love story, we get other great ballads like Tell Me to Go and All I Know. And man, the music just absolutely blew me away. Blew me away. So I hope you've enjoyed some of the little snippets that I played that I've heard so many times, just millions of times with my Sony Walkman back in the day. I just listened to it over and over and over and over and over again. Just gorgeous music. This was just previews, as I mentioned. They were workshopping the musical, but, making people pay to see it. And I was hearing the first snippets, the first time that the songs are going through. The lyrics changed from the first night. Now, I also heard a very first night, first preview night, some of the lyrics were different from that day to the next. But I didn't like that recording. It was really a really bad recording, and it wasn't as good as the second night. Like the first time she sings Why Won't You Love Me, her lyrics are, if you won't love me, then why should I love you? And that sounded kind of whiny. But by the second night of the preview, it changed to, if you won't love me, then how will I love you? That had a better ring to it. So you could see that they were retooling, daily. Then the show finally opened, July 10th, 1996, a day to go down in history. Martin Guerre, it was opening night. Now, critically, it was mixed critically, the reception. Some critics hated it, others loved it. Probably Sheridan Morley was the one that I trusted the most, and I read his review. It's still out there. So what it says here is, for the third time in little more than a decade or so, it would seem from all but about 2 of the first dozen reviews that Alain Boublil and Claude Michel Schoenberg have written a great and classic musical that nobody likes except the public. And we sure did love it. The lyrics of Edward Hardy and Herbert Kretzmer and Boublil himself wonderfully counterpoint the soaring strings of Schoenberg and Jonathan Tunick's breathtaking orchestrations. A song like All I Know will become a classic wherever great show songs are sung, and the ghosts of all the great storytellers of world history gather around this legendary folk tale as the putative Martin Guerre is christened, already in the crucifix position, a Protestant in a very Catholic community. We begin to understand that this is something even more than a devil's disciple set to music. A prediction. Worldwide, I believe that Martin Guerre, whoever he really is, will be around a lot longer than many of his earliest detractors, and maybe even some of their newspapers. Boublil Schoenberg may never become the critical darlings of a minimalist Sondheim age, but their eternal emotional and theatrical understanding of what an audience really wants of a major musical remains unchallenged, undimmed, and unrivaled. Wow. Wow. So anyway, the musical was playing, but it was getting more and more panned by other critics. And so Cameron Mackintosh made the decision to put it on a hiatus and close it very briefly in October of 1996 to retool and just completely and rewrite parts of the musical. So it reopened November 11th, 1996. This was kind of unusual at the time for a big musical, a multi-million-dollar musical to do that. And of course, you know me, look what I got. My friend Sarah went to the new version of the show and sent me the newly revised November version of Martin Guerre in London on tape. I was so thrilled. I had to hear it. I had to hear what they had changed and what they had done. Now, I will say, overall, it was a better story. They had a couple of really great musical parts of it, some new orchestrations, but they did make some things that I thought were mistakes. The first one was they cut the song When We Were Young. Why would they do that? That is a beautiful song. It flows well. You need that song to anchor the story about the community, in my opinion. I don't know why they cut that song. It has never been heard again to this day, really. I can't find a copy of it on YouTube or anything like that. I'm probably the only one of the only people in the world who has a copy of it. And I think that's sad. I think the world needs to hear that song. It's a beautiful song. When We Were Young. It's gone. They cut it. They cut it. Why? Anyway. And then they took Why Won't You Love Me and they moved it into like the middle of the show. And it's just like kind of out of place and awkward there. And it's kind of more about like Bertrand just feeling like the community doesn't like her anymore, which it wasn't as organic as when it was about her finally talking about why her husband doesn't love her. And so they changed its title to When Will Someone Hear? And the lyrics are terrible. The way it was originally was, why won't you love me? What's so wrong with me? I want to know what kind of woman you want me to be. That's how it was originally. But now it's, when will someone hear? All I know is fear. And now I know the meaning of losing all you trust. That doesn't even rhyme. I was completely baffled why they would make that decision. It just made no sense. It didn't flow organically, and the lyrics were terrible. I don't know why they did that. I get Why Won't You Love Me is kind of a simple song. I get it, but it was sweet, and it was simple, and it worked, and then they freaking ruined it. Okay, I can't even talk about it. So that was their second big mistake. And then while they were doing all of this, they released the album, all right? Now, here's where they made their third big mistake. If you look here, this album came out, and it's not called the original London Cast. It's called London Cast, okay? Even though, yeah. Do you know what they did? Do you know what they did? I can't even talk about it, but I'm going to. They took the cast, and as you can see here, instead of putting Juliet Caton on the album, if you look at the very back, at the bottom, for this, it says here, on this recording, the role of Bertrand is performed by Rebecca Locke, her understudy. Now, I read on the message boards on Prodigy that she was devastated. Poor Juliet Caton. I also read some of the reviews. Some people did not like her voice, said she wasn't really trained. She was very young. She was 21 at the time when she portrayed the role of Bertrand. But this was her vehicle. She was Bertrand, and she had that voice that I always loved. I mean, I know that she was a relative newcomer. She wasn't, super trained in singing or anything, but she had a sweetness to her voice, and it was very pure, and I really loved it. Rebecca Locke, you could tell right away, is like a trained, almost operatic singer, and I think while she's a brilliant singer, she wasn't Bertrand. Her voice sounded strange, and to me, she sounded almost aggressive. I don't know. I was starting to get disappointed. I loved what they had originally put out there. I loved what was on the very first. I think they had it right when they first produced it, and then they were just changing it. They were listening too much to these reviewers, and it was losing some of its soul, in my opinion. But it still was coming out. It still had most of its heart was still intact. And here's another article. So here's the article of from Sheridan Morley about, talking about the rewrite of the musical. Let's see what he has to say. It says, International Herald Tribune scribe Sheridan Morley, who already called the score a masterpiece, saw the show in its new form and raved even further. There is no better way for the century and the epic musical to go out than in the blaze of glory and genius that is Martin Guerre. So negative were other reviews, and so shaky the early bookings, that Cameron Mackintosh has spent 3 months with his entire cast and crew rebuilding about 50% of the show's book, lyrics, and action. Why? Essentially, perhaps because it did need some sharpening, clarification, and highlighting for those not prepared to work their way through a complex narrative derived from the great French legend of the returning warrior who may well not be the Martin Guerre he claims to be. Not all great musicals are overnight successes. How many of my colleagues who wrote disparagingly of Martin Guerre that it was nowhere near as good as Les Mis now remember the pasting they almost all gave that just over a decade ago. A supreme score of anthem after epic anthem, heartbreaking in its eternal truth, breathtaking in its understanding of theatrical greatness, and stunning in its sheer stagecraft. Now that is a review. Oh, I was just completely entranced. And even though I felt like they had butchered part of it, I still wanted to see it. However, something happened. The reviewers a lot of them were still negative about the show, and the sales weren't as good as it was hoped to be. And finally, Martin Guerre did close in February of 1998 after almost about 400 performances. So, yeah, I never got to see what that show was. I was, like I said, I was a kid. I couldn't just catch a plane and go see Martin Guerre in the West End. But I got to listen to it and dream about it and draw the pictures. So in some ways I felt like I was there. Now, I did get some souvenir brochures. I can share those with you. So this is the big one right here with this, again, with this insect creature with the tongue sticking out. Look at this. Just look at this beautiful, beautiful souvenir brochure. This is hard to find too. Look at that. Look at all our characters come to life. This is the wedding we've got here. There's Juliet Caton getting married to Martin Guerre right there. Here she is singing, "Why won't you love me?" Or sometimes, "When will someone hear?" Whatever. And of course, we've got Martin singing his the title track, Martin Guerre, dreaming of adventures that the duck has, of traveling the world, like his lyrics. He's seen it all. He's traveled the land. That's all Martin really wants. He just wants to travel. He doesn't want to be married. And then here, of course, we see the handsome stranger played by Ian Glenn. He is an imposter. His name is Arnaud, and he is here to assume the role of Martin Guerre. And these were the three crones, and they were great. They have this great song called "Sleeping on Our Own," and it's kind of for comedic humor. And this is also adds to the humor. This is the village idiot, and he has a scarecrow he talks to named Louison, and Louison is probably the only part one of the great parts where I actually do cry in the musical. Of course, we have a a scarecrow here, and then in the midst of all the fire and flames of the show, so you can imagine what happens with her. But yeah, that was a really touching part of it. I liked Louison, even though she wasn't a real character, a real live person. There's dancing, there's stomping, there's action to this show, believe it or not. And here they are singing All I Know. We've got Bertrand and Arnaud, who have now, even though he's an imposter, they've fallen in love. The stage itself is very threadbare, kind of. It's simpler than others. There is a revolving stage like on Les Mis, but it's mostly just sort of wooden, pieces, very medieval style, put together with very interesting lighting and really making the story shine. And yeah, here's our some of the biggest pictures we've got here. There's Arnaud. There's the beautiful Bertrand, who ends up, as you can see, getting pregnant with Arnaud's baby. So there's, the soap opera-ness of this whole show really, really gets interesting. And, here she is, singing through the bars of prison, and it's like, oh my gosh, I want to see this. Quite quite the souvenir. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Just look at it. So yeah, this was the brochure. Now everyone who goes to see the show gets one of these, at least back then. So someone sent this to me. Oh my gosh, look how devastated I was to see this, that Rebecca Locke performed. Again, very well vocally trained, a great singer, but she just wasn't Bertrand, in my opinion. Yeah, so this is Ian Glenn, the main hero of the show, as the character Arnaud. You may recognize him. He later found fame in Game of Thrones on HBO, playing Jorah the Andal. So he was no longer with Bertrand. Now he's, dating the Khaleesi on Game of Thrones. So yes, again, another tragic figure, but he's good at that. So yeah, I really like Ian Glenn. He's a great actor. His singing is okay, but he really excelled later in life in Game of Thrones. Then we've got poor Juliet Caton, who I just adored. I thought she was a great singer, and I think she did a great Bertrand, even though I didn't really see it. She didn't really have much of a career after that, unfortunately, especially after how they treated her on the album. And you gotta kind of laugh here. Of all of the people in this show, the one who got the most famous was probably this little guy here, James Corden, who was just one of the ensemble background characters, just singing in the village. Ended up becoming a quite famous comedian. I think he's also canceled too these days, like Gerard Depardieu. But yeah, he ended up becoming the most famous of all of the performers in the show. It's interesting. The road to success is truly a winding one. And here's the whole cast. There they are. We've got Ian Glenn as Arnaud. We've got Juliet Caton there. Everyone's really happy. The show was just, look at that. Look at that. This was an incredible show, in my opinion. It's funny. Sometimes people ask me, what if you were to win $1 billion at the lottery or something like that? What would you do? And a lot of people say, oh, I'll buy a huge house or a yacht. I'm not even kidding. My first thought is always to say, I would restage the musical Martin Guerre the way it was during the first previews. I would bring back Ian Glenn and Juliet Caton in their iconic roles. I would bring back the song When We Were Young. I would put Why Won't You Love Me back where it belongs with its lyrics. I would bring back this great logo, and I would restage it. And I wouldn't care what any of the critics have to say because I love it and it's my $1 billion, and maybe it'll become something great again. I don't really know. So the show closed and I was really sad about that. But it did come back. The show did come back. It came back in 1999 with a new logo, which I don't know. It's got fire. It's got the flames of fire, but like also you could kind of see the silhouettes of two people kissing, I guess. It's just very odd. It came back. No longer a big West End show. It was now part of the West Yorkshire Playhouse, still under the production of Cameron Mackintosh, but a completely new version of it. All new, not all new, a whole bunch of new songs here. They had changed. I don't even think, yeah. There is no Why Won't You Love Anything anymore. Now it's a song called How Many Tears, which is terrible. Okay, a lot of these songs were not very good at all. Martin Guerre had been replaced with the song called I'm Martin Guerre. And the orchestrations, which were my favorite part of it, were completely gone. It was now orchestrated by William D. Brone, so I guess he became friends with Cameron Mackintosh again. And I think the orchestrations are all wrong for this. They're heavily piano-based, which pianos never work in medieval shows. Like, I think there was only one time in Game of Thrones, the medieval fantasy, where they put a piano in there, and it felt wrong, and people talked about it too. Anyway, this is heavily piano-based, which doesn't work in my opinion. It's just pianos and drums. It's missing all of the sweeping, soaring orchestra, and it's awful. I bought this, I listened to it. You can kind of relive some of it, but there's barely a trace of the original Martin Guerre in there at all. And then they actually brought it to the US also in 1999. And it came to Minnesota of all places, and I happened to have been living in Minnesota at the time. I've put a few videos on my YouTube of my life in Minnesota. So I was living in Minnesota, and you know what? I didn't even go see it. I knew it was there, but I had just been so heartbroken and just so sad at this stripped down version of it. I knew I wasn't going to like it. So I didn't even bother to see it. I was only a few feet away from it. I could have. But this was not the Martin Guerre I had signed up for. Like I said, I'd seen plenty of pictures. I had heard the orchestrations. There was barely any orchestra to even be there. There was no Ian Glenn. There was no Juliet Caton. It was just, I didn't know what this sad little, husk of a corpse was, but it wasn't Martin Guerre, and I wasn't going to see it because I didn't want to tarnish the memory of what of the fantasy that I had, of the dream I have, of the fever dream of what I thought Martin Guerre really was. It was, in a kind of ironic sense, it was the imposter of the original show. So do you see what I just did there? Someone wrote an article a few years ago, a 25 years later article, post-mortem. And 25 years later, a post-mort on Bublé and Schoenberg's Martin Guerre. It could have been the next Les Mis, but times and styles had changed before this show even took stage. This is an interesting article. It sort of talks about how the show has morphed multiple times and just become this very odd, study of a musical, really. It says, the stylistic flourishes that had tantalized their adoring crowds in the 1980s were undercooked and cliché by 1996. And the theatrical populace had moved on, looking toward pop and rock-oriented scores and nostalgia-fueled adaptations instead of the classically adapted modern operas. So like I said, I think the times had just changed, and it wasn't that people weren't ready for Martin Guerre, but they had been ready for it a lot earlier, and maybe it just came out too late. So I don't really know. Here's another thing the article says. It says, Schoenberg and Bublé have continued to tinker with Martin Guerre. In 2016, the duo was striving to mount a reimagined concert production, but in January 2017, Cameron Mackintosh pulled out completely, ending their once prosperous triad once and for all. The score has gone on to become something of a cult classic for musical theater fans, and its development has become an important lesson for creative teams at the beginning of their careers in the commercial sphere. There is no such thing as a sure thing, and all trends come to an end. Now, that's a very important line there, that the music is a bit of a cult classic for musical theater fans. I am a big musical theater fan, and that music is, I am part of that cult who just adores that original score of Martin Guerre. That the music, the orchestrations, the singing, all of that was just so powerful to me. And just, you know, they use to use Sheridan Morley's adjectives: heartbreaking, breathtaking, just astonishing. Those were the emotions I was feeling when I was listening to this score. And to this day, when I listen to it every now and then, when I can find a CD player, I remember that this was really something else. This was really quite something. A show that will always have a special place in my heart. And people ask me all the time, what's your favorite musical? And I tell them Martin Guerre, and they're like, Martin who? I don't know. Yeah, it never really blew up, and it's I would say it's pretty much forgotten, but I haven't forgotten, and it does live on through this box and all of these CDs and papers and interviews and stuff that I have collected. I don't know, it's very special to me, and maybe it's special to you and watching, and I just wanted to share this with you. It's been 30 years that I've been holding this in, and even before I was born, because obviously. But yeah, this is really such a phenomenal musical, and if you've never explored it and you're interested in seeing a snapshot into a time when musical theater was very different, and this was probably one of the last great big British musicals, then I highly recommend you look into it. You can find some of the scores. You can see some snippets of it on YouTube. You can still find this album out there on eBay. Give it a listen. You just might love it too. So thank you for watching this, and we'll see you next time.